Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Optimizing Your Cannabis Grow by Understanding Your Data. My name is Teresa Bennett, and I'm the editor for Cannabis Business Times. Today, we have with us Jeff Crocker, the Chief Technology Officer for Argus Controls, a company that provides plant-centric control and automation systems for cannabis, as well as a variety of other crops. In the fast-growing cannabis industry, growers are under increasing pressure to have complete control over every aspect of their growing operation. They need to integrate many peripheral systems, from sensors to robotics to cameras, and manage large amounts of data in the process. Today, you will learn how to make sense of it all, to understand the dynamics of your growing operation, and deliver consistent quality batch to batch for your brand. Before we begin, I just want to make a couple of notes. First, you will see the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you click that, it will open up a Q&A box. So you can feel free to type in your questions as the presentation goes on, and we will get to as many as we can before the conclusion. Also note that we are recording today's event, and we will send the video file, including all the slides, to all the registrants via email in the coming days. So with that, I am pleased to hand it over to Jeff Crocker. Thanks, everybody.
Welcome to the Optimizing Your Cannabis Grow by Understanding Your Data webinar. I'm Jeff Crocker. I'm with Argus Controls and been with the company since January of 2021 as the Chief Technology Officer. I've come with 20 years of experience in product management, client relations, business strategy, and have been tasked and responsible for really developing our technology platform with a focus on control systems, but also assessing options for new platforms. It's a very dynamic time, of course, as to join this industry. Is that there's a lot of new technology and data applications are emerging at a rapid pace. So I'm excited to be able to share a bit of that with you here today. And let's dive into a bit more of the topic. So cannabis cultivation is an extremely complex operation, as you're aware, and so but this comes at an interesting time in the industry that we're seeing a rapid growth in the cannabis market, but also we're seeing this complexity and the growing complexity that's involved here, and so it's an interesting confluence because there's two challenges to solve, and so we really see, a large demand for a premium product that requires consistency, but it's not a really easy job to do either of those, and to do them in the growing market with the complexity that we have. So simply put, is how do you do a really tough job really well and then repeat it? And that's one thing to do if you're building something on production line, but we're not doing that. We're growing plants. It's a very organic process, and there's always a lot of variables and pieces of data to handle and things to adjust and change. So there's a lot of technologies out there to support that. You're probably aware of many peripherals like all the sensors and actuators that are running the space. But now we're starting to see things like robotics, automation, cameras, imaging, more sensing. And the end result of all of this is that we're generating a large amount of data in doing this. And so that's going to be extremely valuable, but it's also going to be extremely challenging to synthesize that, understand what that's going to mean, and how to handle that. So there is certainly an eagerness to adopt these new technologies and bring them in. And I'd like to help frame that and understand that, help everybody understand that, hear what we see that being, and go from there. So next, we're going to look at, are you using data to drive decision making? And I think that's a bit tongue in cheek. Of course, we always do. This is really one of the things that we are always using. And the question is, how are you using that, and how are you understanding the dynamics of that growing operation to deliver consistent quality? So there's the significant amount of data available also means that we have to understand what the potential of that and what can be done with it to leverage it to its maximum value. So right now, control systems are running facilities. This has been happening for decades. Argus has been a leader in that. And we are generating a lot of historical data. generally around environmental control systems. So, but the question is how do we go beyond that? And what we're starting to see is database-driven decision-making, and that right now there's a lot more data available. And so what we'll look at is what are those data sets that we could be creating, and what data flows are coming into that. And so we'll look at how we're generating data for control, as I talked about, but also we can look at how the uniformity of the space is, as well as the operation and the success. Really, what are the results that we're getting? All of these are important pieces of data in the growing operation that need to be evaluated simultaneously. And so that's important to be able to do that, to really get that value and help make the best decision from that. So as I mentioned, here are the natural control points of a space that Argus Systems have been doing, all the environmental control systems looking to do this, temperature, light, humidity, CO2, any fertigation, irrigation type operations. These are critical and been happening for decades, as I've mentioned, and it's just expected to have these parameters in control. And that's not really the question here today. This is a sort of an expectation to have. What is important though here is that this data is being collected. It's the foundational data for looking at what's happening in the space. What has the plant experienced? And so we build out from this. So we'll start with this one and go from here. But this control is foremost and critical in the operations. The control system has to have the ability to hold a set point, and it has to transition between set points without significant overshoot or a slow response and taking too long to get there. So an undershoot and delay or lag in the system. So this is expected, and this is happening with the control systems today. But this generates this valuable data on the behavior of the environment, but it also generates data around the behavior of the controls themselves. So how is the control system operating? Does it need to be tuned? And how is the equipment operating? Because if the equipment isn't running right, a control system really can't do much for that. But the data that's generated from that operation can be used to help understand if the equipment is running properly. And so this is another important reason to have this data available and be able to analyze it and interrogate it for that. As I mentioned, we can move on to from a great design growing space, but what about uniformity? And if you're not addressing the uniformity question, then you're going to wonder, well, I know what I'm controlling to, but is every plant experiencing the same? And of course, this is much more dependent on what is the room design, what is the equipment design in that space. All of these things will affect it. And this could be designed initially with an empty room to work very well, but the addition of plants and tables, trays, any other equipment can change the dynamics of the space. And so how do you know that space is still uniform? And by uniform, we're talking about there's always going to be some variation. Isn't an acceptable amount of variation, and how do you understand and evaluate that? So the single point control sensors that we use in a space obviously can't determine variability, but we could look at deploying a sensor array in the space and generate more data. Now, this is great to be able to see all the variation, but there's going to be variation above the crop that's different from variation below the crop. And so you have to be able to separate those out and understand them and not confound those with the control system. Because if you've got dozens of sensors or more, I've seen a facility with 80 plus sensors in a room trying to understand what was happening in 3 dimensions, then the bias is that, oh, those 80 sensors must be right. But they're trying to read the variation, and you can't necessarily replace those and use those to replace the one sensor that's designed to do the control system. So there has to be that balance between the data and the information that's coming from a sensor array versus what are you using for control. That said, still important, really important to have that variation or that expanse of readings. Again, I'll say this, you'll probably hear me say this throughout the webinar, there's never going to be too much data. It's really just going to be making sure that you're collecting the right data and putting it and looking at it in the right way. And so this is another one of those where what is the right number of sensors to put in that space and where to put them so that you're understanding the variation that you're looking for. So there is no, this is not an industry where we have one exact formula for everything. Every space, every plant, every operation is different. So this is a combined effort to really understand this and put it together in a way that makes sense for everybody. But this is valuable data on the behavior of the space, and I think this is very important to make sure that you're getting that uniformity that's going to create optimal yields and growth within the crop. Moving forward, we've talked about the control of the space and the uniformity of the space. There's just a lot more operational data from within the space, and there's a couple slides here of all the different things that can be in control and thus generating data. Now, sensing data coming in is important because it understands what the environment is. As I mentioned before, if you're not looking at what's being operated, then you're missing out on perhaps equipment issues and finding those correlations that may be affecting how the grow or how the space is going. So understanding what's happening with any cooling systems that you might have, heating systems, air circulation and exchange, lighting, CO2 and humidification, dehumidification, all sorts of equipment helping to create those spaces. And we want to understand how those are being tasked and then seeing the results and making sure that they're actually doing what's necessary. But there's just, there's no point in adding any sensors or anything like I mentioned before, unless you're sure that this is going to line up with something else that you're doing and that you're really looking for ways to make that align and be something that you're interested in and really have a premise as to why you're doing it, and then be aware of that data that's generated and then look to correlate it. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just there's going to be some work to get the initial baseline in place. But once you have that, you will find that these data sets will become invaluable in how to see what has happened in the past and then help drive changes and improvements going forward in the future. And this is just a natural cycle of learning that we all go through in everything that we do. And so we have to be able to track what we're doing and then use that to drive forward. So we have some inputs here that are more traditional and basic. Beyond that, we're starting to see more things happening in water rooms and the water delivery side of things. What's happening with the building management system and anything around that, pest management, energy management, all becoming more and more important pieces of data in these data sets. And so we look to bring all of this in because you just don't know where you may see change coming from. In addition to tracking all of this, we're looking at other in-process data collection methods. And so there's, as I mentioned before, image-based data you could be using to automate any plant registration activities that may be taking time or not being done consistently. And so we know there's systems out there that you can use to get plant measurements of height, leaf area index, stem diameter, flower count. Basically anything you can put into a picture, there are machine learning algorithms that we can use to drive those into parameters and start to track those. We can also be looking at pests, we can be looking at disease, color, any number of things. So there's a lot of in-process variables that we're going to want to track and measure. Now, if we're not doing that with image-based systems, then we can do that manually. So we can have growers and staff go around and register information on the plants and add that into that data set. And so then, of course, with that, we're going to want to track anything that's been performed on the plants, any interventions, any activities, if there was trimming activities, etc., logging those into those data sets, so time stamping them and being able to see what was the impact of those operations across a breadth of results, then allows you to really see where the changes is affecting the plants and then see what the result is. And so we'll get a bit to that next, but all of this starts to lead to what is going to be the likelihood of success and what is success. And so you can't determine the likelihood of success without having tracked previous successes. That's just unfortunately we don't have the crystal ball. So in reality, the crystal ball is actually a collection of the previous successes, and then you can start to track and trend and say, we believe it's likely that we're going to get to this. So if with that, I'll jump to the next slide, which talks about, we're talking about critical success metrics in the crop. This is the result of your efforts, right? We're talking harvest time, plant count, how much mass, what's the composition, what are the characteristics? And you can start to then create these metrics from that. And so by metrics, I'm talking about some of the ones that we see in the industry, like grams per square foot, THC per micromole, kilograms per kilowatt hour. So just depending on what you're looking at and what you want, how you want to parameterize what success is for you. There's no right or wrong for that. Any data management system that is used should allow you to create these custom fields and then start to populate them in time so that you can start to track these success results. What's important to you? Is it energy? Is it mass production? Is it composition? All of the above. And then see what was it that created that, and then look for the changes. There'll be changes. It's natural. It's a very organic process to be growing. You want to have that consistency. So you need consistency is going to come because you understand all of the inputs and all of the changes. The only way to be doing that is collecting all of that data that I just talked about. So once you have that database-driven view of the plant's experience, you can then look at that longitudinal across time. And so not just for the current grow, but all of those previous grows. And then start to see what's changed, what stayed the same, and how much has this success changed or hasn't it? And start to find out what those correlations are and then make the adjustments. Put the right processes in place. Maybe it's new equipment, maybe it's tweaking a controls algorithm, looking at scheduling, sequencing, etc. So without all of that, there is a bit of a guessing game with that. And I don't think guessing is the way to be doing this. I think the right way to be doing this is to be using the data and driving it with information. So once you have all of that, you're looking to get those optimized and predictable results. And that learning happens, whether it's by humans or computers. So right now, we're starting to see the evolution of machine learning and AI as being very valuable in assisting our decision making and really being able to work with massive data sets, much bigger than what humans can absorb themselves. Humans are amazing at looking at data, finding those correlations, seeing those relationships, weeding out the noise and getting to key results. But there's a limit, and we have way more data in the growing operations than is reasonable to think that we could just inundate humans with and expect to see those results. So creating these data sets, even if the algorithms are still nascent, they're coming and we're figuring them out. And so with those historical data sets, we can feed those algorithms much more information rather than waiting for the future information to come in and feed those algorithms. So we want to start generating these strong data sets now and then be able to have them inform and improve the algorithms going forward. So I think it's critical that we create these data management tools now, start looking at it and trying to find these correlations with our human brains, and then using that to help feed the systems of the future that will help us get even better and more optimized as we go forward. I mentioned the data sets. Super important to be able to put them all in one place. And where do you consolidate it? Natural that we're going to have the data generated in the control system. It's going to end up in notebooks, whiteboards, an ERP, tribal knowledge just in people's minds. How do we make sure that this is all available? As I mentioned, it's not easy to do it in the human way. It makes it impossible to do it if all the data isn't in one place. And so, and thus, it also makes that impossible for any automated or machine learning systems in the future. So this needs to become consolidated in a way that allows easy comparison of all of that control, uniformity, operation, and success data that I mentioned before. And so then you can really start to understand the cause and effect connections and elicit the insights that you're looking for. So one important point with this, and I'll talk about control system data in particular, is that we want to consider what we talk about as zone data versus batch data. And so one of the notions that we have here is that we control zones. That's what control systems do, and it creates a time series set of data running that zone, and that's how those systems have been doing that. The reality is plants don't always stay in one zone for their whole life. I rarely do they stay in one zone. And so they're moving from zone to zone throughout a facility. And in doing that, unless you have a system that is stitching that data back together from the different zones, you're losing the plant's view of its experience in that data set. And so you might only look at a data set for one zone, but you're going to miss and see anything that might have happened previously or afterwards, and be able to see what I call that large data set in one view. And so it's very important that we start to create what we call a batch relative data view, where we're looking at that plant's experience from as early in life as possible, preferably right from clipping or seed, all the way through till, harvest, production, measurement, etc. And having one data set for that whole plant's experience then allows us to look at every factor and find the correlations and relationships that could be driving results. And so this is just natural. This is what the plant's experience and how we want to see that and start to have that plant's view of things. And so bringing that to a common place is critical. And so getting it out of various silos or locations or hidden away on people's desks or drawers, and putting it together in naturally a digital way. Much of the data we are collecting is digital anyways, but digitizing everything that we possibly can and putting it into a common place and storing that over and over and over again to be able to look at those relationships and bring it together. So something to think about, of course, as you're looking at what do you do in your operations, where is your data stored, and how can you expect it to stitch together in a way that lets you see everything at once. So once we have all of that, so we've got the data generation we've talked about the collection, we've talked about the organization of it and consolidation. What's next? And I touched a bit on this on the success metrics slide, but you can't learn without understanding the outcome. So you perform an activity, you look to see what the result was, you become informed from that, and you adjust as needed. So having these strong data sets allows you to get to that repetition and consistently repeat the things that are working well and stop doing the things that aren't working well. And so, as I mentioned, as humans, we're good at doing that. We're good at capturing lots of data and synthesizing it and making those adjustments. We're just adding a lot more data now than we ever have before, and we're going to need tools to help us with that complexity. Many tools are out there right now. I know some companies have tried using Excel, which is a good generic tool for data analysis. Unfortunately, it's very hard to automate. It's very hard to get good reporting out of. It's hard to do storage and analytics, especially across what I mentioned, that sort of longitudinal time frame, where you're looking at multiple data sets and wanting to compare them over and over. So as I said, there are tools out there, but definitely be thinking about what could you be using to do this better. And so what are we going to get to, and what are the things that we could be achieving? And one of them we see as consistency. We're going to leverage the success of the previous batches, and then we're also able to, even while we're in process, we're tracking, and we could be comparing to previous. So we're not waiting necessarily all the way to the end for success. We could be tracking mid-grow and looking at previous operations and saying, hey, just a second, something doesn't quite seem right, doesn't seem like what we've done in the past. And so that's looking at that a bit like a recipe, but also just having all of that historical view at your fingertips rather than stored away in probably somebody's drawer or tribal knowledge, as I mentioned. So but repeat that over and over and over again and start to get that consistency, which is critical. You know, one thing that we could think about is, you know, consider a trimming activity. The plants themselves, in doing that trimming activity, will impact the airflow, temperature, and humidity in the space, and the room uniformity. But that trimming operation is quite subjective. When do you do it? Who's doing it? How do they do it? How much? How little? Etc. When is it done in the grow? All of these things can affect the results, and so we know we're going to want to do that. How do we then track that? And so we can start to track not only all of those things that we mentioned, but like we can track who did the operation, how much did they take, when did they do it. All of that can start to be tracked and logged and compared against the previous. And then, you know, naturally, if we're starting to see perhaps a negative impact on the plants or negative impact on the parameters of the space, we can use that to inform the trimming operation, maybe make adjustments to the operating procedures or training and management of the staff doing the work, to understand that this needs to be done in a certain way, and here's the results and why. And thus, without that and that data and being able to really show that causality, it starts to become subjective even on the analysis side, and that's not helpful. We've got, you know, one subjective process already. Let's try to use some data to really drive it forward in the best way possible. Really, again, just looking to get back to that, to really get to that consistency on how things are done and how the results come together. If we look at this a different way, we could be talking about the correlations. So we can start to see what are the trends leading to the success metrics. And I've talked a bit about optimization and getting towards better grows. And so how do the plant behaviors react to any control or environmental changes, and start to understand those couplings between things. So really, as I mentioned before, give that data-driven view of your plant's experience, and compare perhaps anything that you might have registered about the plant. As I mentioned before, basic things, even height, leaf area, flower count, stem diameter. With tracking of those relative to the environment, there we can really understand what levers we can play with there, and then know that this is going to give us a better plant result or more consistent results, and be able to track that. And another interesting point is we're talking about all these growing data sets. You may have multiple grows going at the same time, and you probably do, but you may run them, you may grow one crop in one room or one sequence of rooms, and you may try to grow it again in a different sequence of rooms, and you may see different results. And so we can start to look at these data sets and know that in the flowering phase, we were in room 2 for one grow and room 3 in the next, and you got a different result. And so now you're looking at that and saying, okay, what was the difference between those rooms? Again, without having those strong data sets to be able to see and compare those, that nuance may be missed, or maybe not. The room change is pretty obvious, but maybe it's more about what happened in that room. Why is that room different? How is it behaving? And being able to look at those data sets and compare them quickly is super critical. And this then leads to efficiencies, of course. We can be more efficient, not only with the way we use our data, but more efficiently about how we work with the plants. What are the right things to be doing, and what are not? And so we can find activities that perhaps aren't adding value, or finding out, you know, how much we should be doing those. Really understanding those operating costs, and then work to decrease them. So we can always do better. That's kind of the mantra. And so what we're saying here is how to get ahead, how to do that is use the data. It is there, you know, sharing it within the organization and making sure the entire organization, or those looking at the data, are seeing it in the same way. So having a consistent view of it, not having it stored away in multiple places. This allows for improved redundancy within your staff, so that if somebody's not available, everybody's working to the same song sheet, as it were. So looking for, you know, easier management of the crop, effectively planning and deploying those resources within the facility, and then aligning that cost-based view of growing alongside the environmental and success metrics, and then really seeing what are the opportunities that we can use to make business better on this at the end of the day. And so we can look at hypothetical situations. For example, on a mature plant, does spending 5% more energy at the end of the grow actually give us 5% more harvest, more mass, or does it give us 5% more price because it's better quality? Does it give us both? That would be amazing. Of course, that would be a great 5% to spend. But or does it give us neither? And so maybe that isn't the right time to be spending that energy, for example, or time, or resource, or labor, etc. So having that, being able to test that is another opportunity that we can use these data sets for, test a hypothesis and see, and so make a small change and see if that creates a better result in the right direction, and then maybe try it again and try to get some replicates, and use this as a way to really push the boundaries and improve the operations and efficiency of the system. So with that, we'll look at wrapping things up here a bit. Where do we go from here? Well, we're trying to move from a reactive growing operation to being more proactive, predicting the outcomes and driving the grow in the way that we know we want to, and then being able to make sure that it's actually happening. We can ultimately start to look at machine learning and find new optimization points, but without having all that data in one place, it is just reactive right now. So we really want to collect that history and be proactive. The operation side of the business will obviously appreciate predictability, knowing you're going to achieve a certain amount of production because it's being run the exact same way, exact same spaces. It's all been validated, and really minimizing that variability. This is the most proactive approach, and then know what it's going to cost, and then roll that up to a business plan or an operations plan and deliver to that. And so really what you need to be looking at is, are you getting batch relative data as that strong data set, and not just the environmental data, but all the operational pieces and process pieces that feed into that and success results? Do you have the ability to put that in one place and start to see the correlations and the connections over time? So that's important to know that and start collecting one place. And ideally, of course, having that in a software-based tool that you're going to be able to collect that over time and be able to quickly do those comparisons and see those results. As I mentioned, this leads to human analytics, but also machine learning analytics down the road. And so this is understanding all of these inputs, outputs, and it results for models that can drive autonomous growing. We really do think that's going to be, down the road, a real powerful tool for business, and then ultimately better results. But while we're not going to get there without doing it first as humans, we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to figure it out ourselves and get better. We're just never going to, we can't get to the levels of optimization that we can without starting to really throw these big data sets into the computer space. So anyways, finish off with understand your data, leading to more consistency, repeatability, predictability. And those are the key factors for successful cannabis grow. As I mentioned at the start, this is a really difficult growing operation, and it's very valuable, and it's growing in size and business size. And we want to make sure that this can be as successful as possible. So to finish off, use the data. It's there and it's ready and waiting for you to tap into it. So with that, we'll close out the webinar here. We do have a white paper on this topic. Covers a little bit more than what I was able to go into here today. But please, if you'd like that, you can request that through Argus. Go to the website and make contact with us through that, or contact your local sales rep, or you can contact myself. My email address is there. Feel free if you've got any questions for me that you want to ask outside of the webinar. Happy to take that on. But that's it for my talk today, and we'll go through some Q&A. So that's it, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeff, for your presentation. That was super insightful. So just a reminder that we will now be opening it up to some questions. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in the Q&A chat box located at the bottom of your screen. So yeah, we will just kick it off with a couple questions maybe for more of the beginner growers, people just getting into the industry. We have a question here asking Jeff if you could just explain a little bit about what you mean by fertigation and what exactly fertigation means.
Yeah, absolutely, Teresa. Thank you. Fertigation, it's been around for quite a while. It's the injection of fertilizers into the irrigation flow for a grow operation at its most basic level. There's a lot of complexity, and we could go pretty deep on that here, but I don't think we will. Just in its essence, it's irrigating the plants with water, but including the feed for those plants in that water stream. And then mixing that very precisely and appropriately so that you're giving those plants what they need to grow. And so it's a combination of fertilizer and irrigation. It's a bit of a mashup of words there, and thus fertigation.
Great. Okay, awesome. So, you obviously mentioned tracking a lot of different data. I'm wondering, for someone just kind of starting out, maybe someone who isn't used to tracking all this data, I mean, are there a few key metrics that you'd recommend, like tracking from the get-go, and then maybe slowly integrating more, or can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all the operations are going to be collecting this data, and everybody's got to keep track of what the plants are doing. And so it's really going to be what's important to you as a grower, and track that in a way, put that together. And so I think the data is being collected. So I can't really sit here. I'm not grower. We don't have growing facilities. I learn as much as I can and try to understand it as well as I can. I can't really say what those right parameters are. But what I do know is that if they're collected, and they are being collected, and they're stored somewhere else that's not aligned with the environmental data or any of the operational data, facility, anything like that, if you don't put that all in one place, then you'll miss out on those chances to see how they interact and what the impacts of those might be. So absolutely be collecting all that data, but get it together in one place, and try to look at that plant's experience over its whole life, so that you can really start to find those relationships and pick those out.
Yeah, great. We have another question here. You had mentioned maybe a better data management tool than Excel. Someone's wondering if you could name some of those and describe some of the specific benefits of how those are maybe better than others.
Yeah, so I don't want to go too much into all the tools that are out there. Argus has a tool for this. It's called Argus Focus. It's a data management tool that connects directly to the Argus control systems. So we're automatically taking that environmental data and putting it into that data set. At the same time, we're able to receive input data from the users throughout the grow and attach that in, and thus create those long data sets that are batch relative, and find that out. So that's an important piece of it. There's graphing functionality that allows you to do those comparisons that we've talked about. And so to go into the whole market segment about why some might be more robust than others would be pretty much probably a whole nother webinar. We could go in and do a compare contrast. So maybe outside the scope of this Q&A, but it is the right thing to be asking. It's a great question, because there are competitive tools out there to that, and everybody's got their balance of benefits and how it works. I can just say for us, one of the key benefits for Argus Focus is that it does tie directly to our Argus Titan system. So the data flows are seamless from that standpoint, and there's no other stitching in of data or addition. There's no addition of sensors that are required to make that work. It uses the sensors that are built into that control system. So a bit of a benefit there. And some of our competitors are doing that differently and have a different approach.
Great. A question kind of from my end that it's probably very, very basic, but data management versus data storage, are those kind of like the same programs, or are there separate programs for that?
Right on. Yeah, great stuff. So a new world for us, right? Data is becoming everywhere for everything that we're seeing and doing. So for us, data storage lives in both places. We have a data storage solution at the control level, local to a facility, but we're also putting that data up to the cloud where we run our Argus Focus platform. So these are cloud servers. They're hosted by Amazon or Microsoft. All the big companies have these storage data centers. And so that's what we call cloud storage sites, and we put data there as well. We run our Argus Focus platform out of there. And so that's the storage side of the equation. Data management for us is that function, is what that tool is delivering. And so we have our Titan system is a control system, and it runs local in the facility. Argus Focus, we call it a data management tool or data management product, and it lives in the cloud, and it runs outside of the control system. So it's not actively controlling the facility. It's collecting that data and allowing you to add more data to it, manipulate it, view it, and make those analytics. So that's the data management portion of it.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So yeah, there's a question, if you have a recommended program to store data. So would you,
Yeah, well, like I said, the control system will store it automatically. But yeah, I think if you want to get into serious analytics ourselves, and probably most of our competitors are doing this with a cloud-based solution. This has got its advantages, of course, that you're able to access it with your own PC. It's just like a browser that you're going to use. You don't have to install software locally on your PC and worry about those things and upgrading it, etc. So yeah, that's definitely a strong way to do that.
Great. Okay. So somebody is asking, at what size operations, as far as like monthly output, does a system, does like a data system become economically feasible?
Yeah, I think we're here on a cannabis sort of forum, and so I think we're talking about some pretty high value crops, and so I think if you're working on this type of high value crop, this is really the value is going to really outweigh the cost here pretty quickly. So I don't have a number on monthly output, but I think if you're running a facility of pretty much any size, then making sure you've got the right things happening is only going to help make things better. And so even if it's a small system, I think you're going to see those benefits. And so we don't see the cost of a product like this really being a major impact on the bottom line. Of course, there's a cost. We've all got to do business, but we're not. This is a great fit for such a high value crop such as cannabis. So if you're at all interested and concerned about that cost or relative to your operations, please contact us and contact our sales team, who are experts in this field and in our software, but also in the growing operations and the size of those operations, and can really help work with customers to make sure that that's a good fit for what they're doing.
Great. Kind of along those same lines, I don't know if you would have anything more to add here, but from someone asked, from a design and construction standpoint, we see a lot of startup companies on tight budgets. What would be the best use of funds for hardware or software to get them started? Yeah,
absolutely. So from a facility construction design standpoint, it's a pretty complex grow, as I mentioned before, and so we're not here we're talking about the data side of it, so I won't go too deep into facility design and construction, other than we have seen in our experience, we've come into some sites to remediate and seen people what we might call loosely like a Home Depot type solution, where they've tried to do heating, cooling, humidification, dehumidification with non-industrial equipment, non-purpose built equipment, and just really struggle to get that room to perform. And so, as I mentioned before, talk about uniformity, that's definitely one of those ones where you don't want to be really concerned about, cutting it too fine on the design construction side, because if that space is not going to control well and not be uniform, you're going to have a real trouble getting consistent production and quality production out of that. So I think, when you're looking at that to me is probably one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, and certainly from a cost standpoint, definitely an important piece of it. And relative to what we're talking about here on software from a data management standpoint, a much bigger cost. And so that to me would be the best sort of focus of making sure your facility is successful. And again, we're, as a company in the control space, we see this all the time. We work with people to make great facilities. And so again, if you're looking at that and wondering what that approach is, best bet is to get in touch with our sales team, who are the experts. We've got folks who can come to site if they're in the area. We have a team across North America that would love to work with you and understand what's the best solution there. Again, helping you on hardware as well as software solutions.
Great. Another question here. Someone is asking, have you found that data changes based on getting the same seeds from different regions?
Well, as I mentioned before, we're not growers, so we're not we don't have direct experience with that. But it's an interesting point, and I'll tie it in with the data side of things. And I talked about looking at getting that data set across the plant's life, and I mentioned getting from seed or clipping and understanding what that is all the way through till harvest, and what did you actually complete it and get at the harvest side. And so seed location, so having where that seed came from and its information populated into that data set right from the start. And so knowing that this batch came from this group of seeds, having that data loaded into that data set, or if you're using clippings from mother plants, what was that mother plant, what was the clipping, what was the process even to do that clipping, etc. Loading all of that into that, not because that's maybe you'll see a result of that right away, but you're going to want to see that over and over again and start to see these trends. As you've mentioned, potentially you can get different results from different regions. I don't doubt it. I don't have experience with that, but I think that's certainly possible. And I think it's, all of it should be tracked, and that's definitely a piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, like you said in your presentation, humans are good at spotting trends, but we don't have data analysts here to link interventions to plant impacts. So can you talk about how we resolve that, or if machine learning can somehow help?
Absolutely. So, start with the end of that, which is machine learning is absolutely where we see this going longer term. We're working on building out those algorithms and those models to understand and find those trends and those nuances that are hard to spot, that aren't necessarily obvious to the human eye. So we definitely see that coming down the road, and we're continuing to look at that. And there's many companies in that space and looking at it, and we think that's going to be really powerful. Those machine learning algorithms cannot succeed if they don't have these data sets that I've talked about. And so what we're seeing here is we don't want to start making those data sets once the algorithms are ready. We want to start making those data sets now, because those algorithms can learn from the historical sets. And so they don't have to wait for us to start growing and then start learning. They can learn from the history. So we believe we should be starting that now and trying to look for it as humans. And you're right, like there's going to be things that we're not going to pick out with the human eye. And so, if you're not at a stage to have a data analyst who's somebody who's trained and has tools and mechanisms to pick those out, well then, I think this is where, you want to make that as easy as possible for yourself. So if you're using a tool, like I mentioned, Argus Focus, that might allow you to more easily find those trends than you would if you had it in a different system. So definitely be trying. I think you make it as easy on yourself as possible. And if it starts to make sense for you, definitely data analysts and tools, et cetera, can help improve that. And ultimately, let's all look at the opportunity to do some machine learning down the road and help make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Also in your presentation, you mentioned stitching data together batch to batch. If the product moves to different rooms mechanically, cutting and pasting all that data together can be time consuming and prone to errors. So wondering if we can automate that stitching process together.
Yeah, exactly. That's the essence of what I mentioned on Argus Focus. We're doing that automatically from the Titan data that's coming into it, and absolutely we see that there's this time-consuming challenge here. It can be error prone, and that can be an important lever, even in the beginning, to be thinking about. Is if you're looking at doing this or already doing this, there's a time consumption, there's an effort to extract the data from a system and then start to combine it and start to align it with what the plant has experienced and move that zone data into batch data. And that effort can be really significant. We've had some customers tell us this is half of a person, half an FTE, and half a resource, or people are spending a big chunk of their time doing this, and they should be spending time growing. They should be spending time with the plants, monitoring, doing activities, operations, and the data should just be there for them. So I think that from a value proposition standpoint, using a tool to do that can have payback at that level, which if that helps move the needle and make the decision to go ahead and do it, then I think that's great. I think if you can help solve it with an ops cost view, then get then the benefits, everything after that is on top of that, right? And so then you don't have to try and convince the people who are buying the software that you're going to get a growth in revenue or improved returns as a justification for the software. If it means that you're spending less time dealing with this data and that helps justify it, I think that's a really important way to look at it, and know that you're going to have that ability to do a lot more analytics and detail from that. So yeah, definitely be thinking about that and looking to improve that process.
Yeah, great. You also mentioned in your presentation sort of trying to experiment with different metrics, tweaking them and seeing if that changes anything, if that improves things. So wondering, how long you would recommend trying something, adjusting a metric before drawing any conclusions.
I'd say we look at it and we think if you've got 2 or 3 sequences that you're looking at, so if you've done it 2 or 3 times and you've got consistency from that, or you're not seeing variation, then I think you've got enough. You've got a stable starting point, a basis for that. But it will depend, and every parameter and variable can be different. So there's no one size fits all answer. Unfortunately, I wish we had those. So the data management analytics space is really successful when it's just allowed to continue to collect and store that data and provide an easy way to extract those results and start to see those parameters line up. So you may for some things there may be enough variability. You might need 10 in order to really get a sense of how they're actually moving, and there's just that natural variation, or that may be an indicator that you need to be doing something because there's that much variability. So yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I believe that concludes all of our questions. And so that is the conclusion of our webinar. So thank you everybody so much for attending and for watching. And thank you so much to Jeff and to Argus. Appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks, Teresa. It's a pleasure doing it, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yes, you too. Everybody have a great day.